Hello, I'm Mallory Grine. Sadness is not all there is to depression, and it can stem from so many things that seem so small to everyone else. But depression is a serious issue in our society today, and it can be caused by so many factors like social isolation, discrimination, and even the fear of judgment from others. It's something that we as a community don't always recognize, see, nor do we really understand it. But with better understanding of all of the causes surrounding depression, would we be able to better understand what those people go through on a day-to-day basis? One of the most prominent causes for depression is the fact that people who suffer from it often feel lonely and isolated from our world and community as a whole. In terms of depression, loneliness and social isolation are the same thing, but are so very different at the same time. On one hand, loneliness is the state of not emotionally connecting with the people around you. And on the other hand, being socially isolated is where physical interaction is put to a complete and utter stop. In the article Social Isolation, Loneliness, and Depression in Young Adulthood by Timothy Matthews, it states that social isolation and loneliness were moderately correlated, reflecting the separateness of these concepts, and both were associated with depression. Being lonely and not being able to form those emotional connections and emotional relationships with the people around you can be super detrimental to your mental health. Every human being needs to form relationships with others, and having this problem can unfortunately cause you and the others to slip into a depressive state. Being socially isolated, on the other hand, and physically cut off from people may even actually be worse. It is a known fact that humans need to be able to have that physical connection and that physical touch with others to keep their mental state at an appropriate and constant level. If that physical connection is not existent or even cut off, becoming depressed is one of the highest and mainest risk factors. That's not a word. A real-time example of our community experiencing social isolation and loneliness was when the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 fell upon us. The pandemic was one of the worst times that we've ever seen depression rise in teens and young adults. In the article, A Qualitative Study on Young Adults' Social Isolation During the COVID-19 Lockdown, was a research participant stated, "There was a point where I thought I was suicidal, and it's easily the lowest I've ever gotten to, and the lowest point in my life. Students were pulled out of school, sent home, forced to learn online through a computer screen, ultimately disconnecting them from their peers and teachers. This is when we saw that huge increase in depression across our community. They were only seeing their immediate family of their households, ultimately isolating them from their daily peer groups and all other types of physical human interaction. But not only being isolated, loneliness was seeping into the cracks of their homes because no other emotional connections were being formed outside of the household, only through screens, and we all know that is not the same. Loneliness and isolation are not the only causes of depression, but it can even stem from some of the most basic things like race, class, gender, and even your sexuality. Discrimination is something that is becoming a big issue in our society, but it is causing more harm than we actually understand. Basic characteristics like the color of your skin, how much money you make, or even who you choose to love are all things people choose to exploit when they don't agree. And this exploitation has so many harmful effects, including depression. In the article, Depression and Discrimination in the Lives of Women, Transgender and Gender-Liminal People in Ontario, Canada, it tells us that analysis revealed that race, gender, class, and sexuality all corresponded to significant differences in exposure to discrimination, experiences of depression, and unmet needs for mental health care. People are different in so many ways, and this can range from something you're born with, like the color of your skin, all the way to who you choose to love. The fact that people get tormented, bullied, and even patronized for the most simplistic things can be negatively affecting their mental health, causing them to gain depression. This discrimination against these people can make them feel like they don't belong in our society, which can cause them to develop the disease depression. Depression is a tough beast, but it is not limited just to certain people. Discrimination, though, is more of a monster to certain peoples and groups. But in a study, it showed us that discrimination and depression combined targeted not one specific group, but everyone, no matter what they looked like, who they loved, or what they believed in. In the article, Depression in Racial Ethnic Minorities, the Impact of Nativity and Discrimination, it states, the effect of discrimination on depression was formed to be significant even when controlling for demographics. In all reality, depression can affect every single person in our society. Whether the color of your skin is white, red, black, or even yellow, it doesn't matter. Depression doesn't discriminate. Depression is defined as a mood disorder. It causes a persistent feeling of sadness or loss of interest. But nowhere in those words does it tell us anything about certain guidelines for who depression can affect and who it can affect. In the end, those simplistic things do not matter. But all that matters is the fact that depression is something that can take over everyone, no matter what the circumstances are. But with all great causes of depression also comes great effects. One of the biggest effects of depression for students is the fact that they fear judgment from their family members and peers, and that in most cases causes them not to speak about it. In the case of my friend Patricia, this fear of judgment was one of the things that made her depression worse and to spiral and ultimately caused it to become out of control. The other day we sat down and were talking about the experiences she experienced when she was going through it, and she stated and told me, I was always afraid of what people would think of me because of the life I lived. She went on to explain that her parents were well off and that she got almost anything she wanted with asking. They were never divorced and never fell out of love, and their house was the perfect dream any kid could ever want. She felt, though, as if she told her friends that she had depression, they would give her a hard time, because in her eyes, she felt as if she had no reason or need to be depressed because of what her home life was like. She even told me that it got so bad that she felt guilty for having the feeling she had, because she knew there were people out there who were worse off and probably suffered way more than she ever did. This fear of judgment is not something that only affects people mentally, but it can also affect them physically as well. With certain victims of depression, physical harm such as self-cutting can be prominent, especially in the worst cases. With this physical harm, though, comes physical judgment from others. In Patricia's story, she told me, the times I went to soccer practice with physical harm showing, I would get dirty glares and judgmental looks. She informed me that these judgmental looks made her fear the judgment from others even more than she had before then, and that this fear had took over her life and ultimately caused her from trying to make the depression better. She explained to me that those looks made her realize that her teammates and even her coaches never understood what she was going through, nor did they want to understand what she was going through. This fear of judgment from others is one nasty side effect of depression, and it can be one of the most harmful things a victim of the disease can experience. The truth is that depression hurts us. And there's so many things that factor into it that the human eye cannot understand or really see. It is obvious that depression is one hell of a disease that causes so many detrimental problems for our community and society. And in conclusion, we see that as a whole, we do not fully understand the causes and effects on the individuals that suffer from depression. Depression is a serious issue in our society today, and can be caused by so many factors like social isolation, discrimination, and even the fear of judgment.